Friends, please welcome our Almond Board Specialist Field Outreach and Education, Michael Roots.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the last day of the 50th Almond Conference. I hope it's been a useful and enjoyable experience so far. We have a number of great sessions lined up for the day, with 4 sessions offering a variety of different CEUs, including this one that offers CCA credit. There's a code out front. Please visit page 25 and 26 of the program for CEU instructions. As a friendly reminder, the Almond Conference Expo is open until noon today. Please make sure to stop by ABC's Resource Diner to pick up the brand new resources, as well as some industry favorites, including the 2022 Research Update book, as well as the Disease and Nutrient Deficiency book, which is a brand new resource that is great for growers. And check out the Incentive and Grower Support Zone, also on the second floor lobby over there, to learn more about the many incentives available to growers. The Food Truck Village will be open today from 10:30 to 1:30 p.m. For those interested in applying for the Almond Leadership Program, applications are due by tomorrow, 5 p.m. Visit almonds.com/Almond Leadership Program. For my introduction, I am Michael Roots with the Field Outreach and Education team at the Almond Board of California. We worked with growers directly in the field, offering whatever support that we can help with them. Part of that comes with working with the research team and outreaching to growers and putting together a session like this. As you all know, and we are aware as well, input costs are at an all-time high, and decisions need to be made now in your operations to increase the return on your investment and to help manage the cost of high inputs. For the next hour, we'll review industry experience on how to manage labor, pesticides, and other input costs in your operations. We have a great set of panelists that have wonderful experiences, and I will give them a brief introduction before I let the experts talk to you guys and give advice on how to manage your input costs. We have Dr. Josette Lewis, who is the Chief Scientific Officer of the Almond Board of California. She leads our entire research program, always with the focus of research that will help growers in their operations and what will benefit them the most. We have Peter DeBoer with Yara. He is a second-generation almond farmer from Oakdale, California. He serves as the regional sales manager for Yara, North America, in Northern California, and is a proud weekend warrior farmer. Dr. Justin Ney has spent most of his career as an independent PCA. The majority of it has been in almonds. He lives in Chico, but advises fields all over the state. He founded his company, Integral Ag, Inc., in 2008, and since then, it has grown to 7 partners and 70,000 acres of mostly tree nuts across the California Central Valley and Arizona. We have Lucas Avila, who is a senior regional manager for Manulife Investment Management, Farmland Management Services. He oversees around 20,000 acres of tree nuts, the majority of them in almonds. He manages the daily challenges in his operations. Then we have Brittany Goodrich. She is an assistant professor in cooperative extension in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at University of California, Davis. She grew up in Iowa, where the uncertainty in agriculture production and markets influenced her friends and family. This has led to an interest in researching how farmers can make choices to address uncertainty in their operations and how to make more decisions based on economic data. So we will get started with the panelists.
All right. So at the Almond Board, we pride ourselves on using the best available science, working with outstanding researchers throughout the state and even actually throughout the nation to bring that best available science to you. But that is always combined with grower experience, PCA experience, practical knowledge, and diversity of expertise that comes from people within our own industry. And I think that this panel will hopefully illustrate that. I'd also really underscore the resources that you can pick up at the almond booth, which are exactly that combination of the best available science together with the practical experience and knowledge on the ground that together makes for hopefully the resources and information that you need to consider for your operation. So maybe kind of starting out with the beginning of the growing season with pollination. We had a session last, whatever day that was, a Tuesday? It's a long day, it's a long week. Tuesday on almond pollination, and we've been funding research to look at the reevaluation of stocking rates for almonds, both conventional and self-compatible varieties. I think it's very clear from that research as well as previously published research that self-compatible varieties like Independence, Shasta, Yorizani, the new variety coming out, yield higher with bees. So while bees are not a trivial cost and input into the orchard, it's very clear that having sufficient bees does give you an optimal yield. So if you have large blocks and you haven't been putting bees, you might reconsider that. It was a really great session yesterday on fertigation. We all know how painful the price of fertilizers have been the last year, and while those have come down a bit, still a really critical part of growing almonds. I think most of you are probably familiar with the 4 R's, but I would really underscore, in particular, understanding crop demand. So really the right time. Some really good combination of research and practical data showing that timing, that sort of the conventional knowledge of when to apply your fertilizer may not be consistent with what the tree is actually demanding, and I'm sure you're gonna underscore that. Really, uptake of nitrogen fertilizer in particular starts only after the tree is starting to leaf out. So really understanding that crop demand, using smaller and more frequent doses so that if you don't get it exactly right, you're reducing your risk. If you're only fertilizing a few times out of the year and you miss one of those in terms of timing, or you have some inefficiencies in your actual hardware, in the irrigation system, then it's gonna have a much bigger impact. So really understanding your crop demand is a critical part of that. Understanding the variability across your blocks becomes sort of the laddering up of the more efficient use of your fertigation system. And while you have, when you put in a new irrigation system, you've designed it once and it's gonna be there for a long time, you have the block that you have, you do have some ability to apply more variable rate in certain ways. Certainly things like potassium, which are band applied, you can vary that if you understand that certain portions of that block are more likely to be deficient in potassium. And foliar sprays can be a way to kind of plus up some of the more deficient areas rather than over-fertilizing the entire block to meet the needs of the deficient area. So some good examples there. And then I think really one of the most critical take-home messages yesterday from fertigation is that you have to really maintain the equipment. It's never as good as it is the day that it goes in terms of its operations. So maintaining the distribution uniformity, plugging those leaks, fixing those emitters, keeping the filters clean is going to be critical. And that does take labor and man hours, but it will pay off in terms of more efficient use of the fertilizer and higher yield. So make sure you have a good team behind that, I think, with some really practical information we got yesterday. Today, there'll be a session on rootstocks. If you happen to be putting in a new orchard this year or next year, really encourage you to stop by and get the new rootstock decision support tool. This is based on a lot of years of rootstock trials across the entire state. We hear from nurseries whom we meet with every year, a lot of growers will go in and say, I want this variety on a hybrid rootstock. And then they get whatever hybrid rootstock the nursery happens to have a lot of. Well, depending on what your soil is, you want the right rootstock for that kind of soil. And this tool will help you make that decision. If you make a compromised decision, you might end up with disease problems, you might have anchorage problems, you might have to, trees might die off and you have to remove them. That's gonna be an added cost to replace those trees, and obviously if you have the wrong rootstock, you can be forfeiting some yield. So a decision that you only make once every 20, 25 years, but hopefully this resource will help you make a better decision that works for your particular area. We have a session also this afternoon on pest management. Obviously, this is another big cost aspect of growing almonds. So I think you'll get some good information there. There's some really great new resources that we have at the almond booth on weed ID, on pest ID, and now deficiencies and diseases. Correct diagnosis is absolutely critical to putting the right product in the right amount at the right time. It's almost like the 4 R's of pest management. Threshold-based treatments, rather than it's May and I need to do a spray, or you know, I'm going to do this tree row to tree row weed treatment. If you use the wrong product, it won't be very effective. If you use it the wrong time, it won't be very effective. And there are some times where maybe you're under the threshold and you could even get away without a pest treatment. So really understanding the identification of the particular pest, disease, or weed that you have, and using those thresholds to be able to make a decision as to when you need to apply is really critical. And then last, I would just always, I think I've had, I don't know how many sessions I've been part of this week, the incentive zone. There are government grants that can help defray some of the costs of trying to do integrated pest management practice, sweep grants for irrigation efficiency improvement, healthy soils grants for things like cover crop, compost, that can help offset some of your long-term costs in the orchard. So definitely check out the incentives and visit the almond booth for some additional resources.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Josette. That was a great recap of everything that we've gone over at conference so far, and I hope you've all had the opportunity to enjoy these sessions. Next up, we have Peter DeBoer with Yara, who's going to talk about the fertilizer market and some efficiencies that you can find in your operations.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. As a fertilizer guy, there are 2 main questions that for about the last 2 years we have been asked a lot at Yara. Yara is an international fertilizer company. We're based in Norway. We do a lot of business worldwide. And we have a very prevalent position here in California with a lot of physical assets that we use to bring product in that's used in almond production. Does anybody have a guess as to what some of those questions might be that we hear all the time?
Cost.
Why does fertilizer cost so much? That's always the #1 question.
What differently, right?
Yeah, and then when are things expected to go back to normal? Those are 2 questions that are important to everybody because input costs have increased across the board, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about fertilizer or chemicals or labor or any of the associated costs that go into that. Things are expensive these days. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to give you just a little bit of background as to why we are in the situation we're in. Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you where things are going to be in 12 months. But my hope today is also to give you maybe some practical things that you can do to try to help you manage the budget dollars that you have better on the fertility side. If we think back to the last 2 years, it's kind of been a crazy time to be alive, just in general, and it's been a crazy time to be involved in agriculture. And there's been a lot of chaos that really started back in 2020 with COVID-19 coming and really taking the globe by surprise. I'm looking forward to never having to talk about COVID-19 again, as most of you are, but unfortunately, we're still feeling, I think, the impacts of the disruptions that were caused, especially early in 2020, specifically as it relates to the production of products that we need to grow the crops we grow here, and then the way that we bring these products into market. There were a lot of subsequent things that happened afterwards that were ripple effects of COVID-19. So you have retaliatory tariffs, where nations that produce fertilizer products decided maybe it would be a good idea for us to keep these here so that we can produce food for our own population as opposed to exporting them out to other parts of the world. And all of those things have a drastic impact specifically on us here in California because we rely on the West Coast on imported fertilizer products to bring in the stuff that we need to grow. If you looked at production of fertilizer throughout the U.S., it would be concentrated in the South and in the Midwest. Coincidentally, that's where most of the fertilizer that's produced here is actually applied. And so we typically get whatever the leftovers are from domestic production, and we rely on outside sources for the rest of what we need. And probably one of the most important things that's happened is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And I put this slide in here because I think it's important to recognize that in a global economy, what happens all the way across the world does impact us here at home. And Russia is an incredibly important component of the global fertilizer picture. If you look, there's a lot of ones, twos, and or a lot of ones and threes and fours here. And this represents how much of the global fertilizer demand does Russia export. When you take this out of the market, which is what has happened because of retaliation from the EU and sanctions that the US has placed on Russia, that makes a big impact, especially again on us, as we have a limited fertilizer supply that's further depleted. And so this is really what is driving, I think, sustained increases in costs. And until this conflict gets resolved, I think we're going to be stuck with an environment that's similar to the one that we've seen for the last year. If we were to sum up our environment agriculturally right now, there's not a lot of good news out there, unfortunately. Inflation, rising costs in the labor market, labor shortages, a strong dollar, difficulty exporting product. There's a lot of challenges that we face as an industry, but there are things that we can do, I think, to help growers and the industry as a whole to maintain profitability, even though the market is not where we want it to be today. So I wanted to leave you with just a couple of things. I'd be happy to talk to any of you, all of you, afterwards about some of these things more. But a couple of key things that I would encourage you to keep your eye on as we enter the upcoming years. And number one is really to maximize productivity. As you might have noticed from my last name, I'm Dutch, and there's a lot of jokes about how tight Dutchmen are. And so we're notorious for being pretty frugal. Frugality works very, very well on an individual level when it comes to finances, but in farming, you have to spend money to make money. And so it's important, I think, in a market where crop prices are depressed, for us to focus on how do we produce the most that we can, because that's the way that we go from potentially farming at a loss to being profitable or breaking even. So keeping your eye on the ball about maximizing productivity. Second thing is ask lots of questions. As you look around this room and as you've walked around the expo floor, heard the different discussions that have taken place, there's a lot of knowledge in our industry. And if there's ever been a time to try to tap into that as a grower, that time is now. The first question that usually gets asked is, well, how much is whatever it is I'm talking about going to cost? And that's a very important question. But if the questions stop there, I don't think we're doing ourselves a service as a grower, because there are lots of opportunities to figure out how to do things better. The third point kind of dovetails off of that, and really I would encourage everybody to look at how can I leverage new technologies and approaches to better on-farm productivity. One of the most important and exciting things that I think we're doing at Yara is we have a long-term research farm in Modesto where we're growing almonds, and we are putting conventional and I think more forward-thinking approaches as it relates to crop nutrition actually to the test. And so we're trying to validate, okay, how do different approaches affect profitability? I think about fertility a lot in the same way that I think about irrigation. 30 years ago, most of the orchards that we saw were flood irrigated, and you applied water on a calendar schedule, you had a certain amount, and that's the way you did things. Fertility is still approached that way in a lot of cases, and so there is room to do better. And it's not just products that make the difference, it's how we apply those and when we apply them, as Josette talked about earlier. Fourth thing is stay focused on the long term. Nobody plants an almond tree expecting to harvest a crop the following fall. That's not realistic. We plant these with the expectation of 25 to 30 years of harvest coming afterwards. And figuring out how to weather these dips in the market while maintaining productivity is going to affect not just this next year's crop, but every subsequent crop for the life of that field. afterwards. So it's important that we stay focused on the fact this is a long-term game. It's not a 1 or 2 year deal. And so we need to manage with that in mind. And the last thing, as a grower, this is something I'm holding on to as well, is stay positive. We have a dynamic, important industry that we are participating in. We grow a crop that you can't just grow anywhere. You can't throw it in the ground in any geography, produce a crop. We produce the highest quality, highest yielding version of this crop globally. So we have a lot of things going for us. One of my favorite quotes, an old grower that I used to work with told me, is things that can't continue forever won't. And this market that we're in today is not going to be the same market we're in 5 years. Better days are coming, and we need to manage and plan accordingly for that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Peter. We really appreciate that. And next, we're going to move on to Justin Ney with some help on pest management, monitoring, and control.
Good morning. Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I'm going to talk mostly about navel orangeworm and how we approach it at our company. Hopefully, with this wet weather, you guys are getting out there and starting to sanitize and get those mummies out of the trees, get the navel orangeworm out of your fields. It's a chronic pest. We deal with it every year, different levels from one year to the next, and we've got some little tips and tricks that might help you, save some money in your budget as well as get better outcomes. So for the past 16 years, we've been going out every December and collecting mummies out of orchards all up and down the state. And so this graphic here shows the average for the state level of the mummy infest ratio. And I use that term because you can often get more than one worm in any individual mummy. Actually, my business partner found 35 navel orangeworm larvae inside one nut. Not this year, a couple of years ago, but so you can really end up with skewed results from one year to the next if you just go out and try to practice the same level of sanitation every year. So the ongoing average is about 20 worms per 100 mummies, and we can see large fluctuations from one year to the next at our clients. So kind of the take home from this slide is that if you just practice the same thing every year, you may or may not get the same results, and then you might wonder why. And so going out, check 30 to 40 mummies per variety, per block or sub-block. The more samples you take, the better your results will be. But you can really quickly find out what your population is. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So with the 20 worms and 100 mummies as a kind of an ongoing state average, you can kind of see how the 2 mummies per tree math from the old days works out. If you planted 100 trees on the old plantings or 140 trees on some of the newer plantings, you're looking at a female population of 20, 28 females per acre. That's just at that average, but you could see how that variation from one year to the next can change that. So sometimes if you don't do more sanitation, you might end up with worse results than you might have expected. So, and 28 females per acre is a pretty small number, and that's why we typically get good results with sanitation. So like I said, hopefully you're taking advantage of this wet weather, getting out there, getting those mummies out of the trees, crack a few of them, see how infested they are, and decide if certain varieties need more sanitation or less sanitation in your fields. So you can take that mummy infest number, and then this slide is just kind of a placeholder to help me remember that once you recommend a level of sanitation, to your grower, based on the infest that you're seeing out there, after it's all said and done, we go back out, count the numbers of mummies per tree, and we can come up with an actual population estimate for that field. And so we will be doing that mostly in January and sometimes all the way up into February as bloom starts, as sanitation gets wrapped up. And we see population numbers range from 0, sometimes growers do such a good job we can't even find a mummy, we've seen numbers into the thousands in almond orchards, thousands of females per acre, and you cannot spray that out. I don't care how you try to do it, you cannot spray your way out of that disaster. So typically, you know, we see numbers that range from 40 to 200. Those are kind of our normal female population estimates from one year to the next. And then with that, then we're trying to come up with mitigation for the season. Let me check my notes. So it's pretty simple process, just takes a little bit of time to crack the mummies out, check them. And I do want to remind you, you can't use harvest data to determine your population, because I already mentioned that there can be more than one navel orangeworm per mummy. Also, navel orangeworm live in the hulls, so you have to inspect the hulls as well. So the growers with hard shells, you don't get away with just, oh, it's a Butte Padre, so I don't have to sanitize it. The Padre are one of our worst offenders up and down the state year in and year out, because so many larvae can live in the hulls. And then thirdly, the navel orangeworm is flying after harvest and infesting your mummies. And some years, they're infesting nuts all the way until December. So going out and collecting the mummies in December and checking them is really key to establishing a baseline. And every ranch is a little different, depending on your yield and your whole split timing. You know, your population will play out differently than perhaps a neighbor. But one of the first things that we do with that mummy infest data is we go back and say, okay, this variety, if we spend more dollars here on this variety, we're going to get better results. And so that's kind of the first step. Another fun thing that you can do is there's a controlled environmental chamber that's out there on the market. You can put the mummies in those chambers, and you can figure out your individual flight characteristics for your block, because the larvae are in all different sizes. So there's small larvae, large larvae, pupae, and each ranch is going to have a different flight pattern each year depending on those instars of larvae. And what we found is that basically the humidity seems to drive more of the navel orangeworm's development than temperature, especially in the drought years. So you can have long extended flights if we're in a drought. Mm-hmm. So one of the mitigations that we like to do once we have our population estimate is put out the trap called the Peterson traps, and these trap only mated females, and based on the size and number of navel orangeworm in the orchard, we'll put out a certain number of these traps, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But what you see in this trap is very, very bad. You do not want this in a trap. This means you didn't sanitize, and you've got worms coming out your ears, and these mated females are finding their way to this bait and getting trapped. So it's a good monitoring tool, but it also removes the mated females from the system before they can deposit eggs on the mummies. So if you install these in April and you leave them up through whole split, or at whole split, they start to become less effective because of the competition with the whole split nuts. You can remove a significant portion of the female population without any treatments. So one year, this is an interpolated surface map from 2017 and 2018 of a couple thousand acres, 2 traps per acre. And in 1 year, we had great sanitation with very low infest. And that ranch didn't need to even get a whole split treatment and got excellent results. So you can save sprays by putting these traps out and informing you of the population size in those fields. The following year, not so much. They left more mummies, they had a higher infest. Still ended up being okay, but you could see that year we needed a whole split treatment. So we can use these tools to tell us the right amount of treatments as well. Do we need to do a May treatment? You know, with the leaf-footed bug becoming more problematic, you know, the spray costs for including a navel orangeworm material, that really ratchets up the price. So and then also another benefit is if you don't have to do a whole split spray, you can decouple your mite treatments to treat your mites at a better time. And so just because we're making a pass to treat navel orangeworm at 1% hull split doesn't necessarily mean that's the right time to spray for mites. So the ability to separate those two and even just remove a hull split spray for navel orangeworm and then just target the spider mites can end up having better results and getting you all the way through your pollinators. So in short, if you go out there, you crack your mummies, you figure out your female population, you put up one of those traps per every 6 females per acre, I promise you, you're gonna like the results. Sorry, I'm taking too long here, huh? So with that, sanitation, you could save sanitation money and focus your dollars more specifically directed at killing navel orangeworm, not so much about worrying about mummies. You can figure out if you get that population right, do I have to spray navel orangeworm in May or do I not? And a lot of times you don't, especially if you do good sanitation. And then you can use those mass traps to help confirm your population estimates as well as assist in if you need to do more treatments if your estimate was wrong. So with that, I will pass it along to Lucas.
I don't have any slides.
Thank you very much. You can forward one more and it'll have a slide. Next up is Lucas Avila, and he's going to talk about labor and equipment and some efficiencies.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you guys are enjoying the conference. It's been a good conference. I'm learning a lot. I appreciate it. That's one thing to talk about. You know, we're talking about driving ROI inputs. Everybody's talked about it. Everybody's stressed about it. You know, price of commodities are down. When we think about farming, we think about what we do year in and year out. And we do the same things consistently because that's what we know. This is a mature industry. There's a ton of resources out there. So when you're going to make decisions in the field based on this year and last year and what you've seen and what, you know, Justin shared just now, you consistently kind of do the same things because in farming, we're always behind, right? We're never caught up, and then when we're caught up, we realize we take a deep breath and then we're behind again on something else. So when you're making these decision points, you have to really touch base and have these conversations and these relationships in the industry. Right now, everyone's trying to figure out how to save money because the commodities are down. You know, so you go, okay, what am I going to carve out this year? You have to think about it, what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, because every farm is different. What works for me won't work for you or your neighbor. You know, your neighbor has a great idea and you see him doing something, you're like, man, I'm going to do that. That's going to work great for me. And you know, they have a different situation. So when you're thinking about it, it's a math problem. I love math. I like thinking about how to drive returns. And right now we're in this era of innovation. The almond industry for the last 15 years has been the best it's ever been, I would say, as far as yields and commodity prices have been. So it's been easy to get away with making mistakes. You know, you go through the field, you make an extra pass because you made a mistake or you were behind on something. Now everything's critical. Your timing's critical. What you apply is critical. You can't use the same things that you used last year because if you're applying the same nitrogen or the same fertility program that you used last year, you might not need that. There's great resources out there where you can talk to your PCAs, you can talk to an agronomist, you can talk to the research board. You can pull soil samples and you can go, where are we at? What am I doing? You know, you think about it and you go, that's a cost. You know, I don't want to spend the $60 an acre per sample. But if you're spending $300 an acre on something that you don't need, that $60 just saved you money. And that's the way we have to start thinking about this as an industry. We like to do what we know because it's easy and it's comfortable. And then when someone comes to you, you know, and this has been a great event, but I mean, salesmen are great, but everybody's got the best product, right? My product is the best. And if you don't understand it, you don't ask the questions, you don't take the time and invest in that to understand what benefit it provides to you and your farm, then it is just a sales pitch. But you're not doing your job on your end to understand the products, because every product is good if you need it. So driving returns long term in your farm are compounded annually on those decisions. So if you try to skimp money on something this year, you might get by, but in 2 years you're going to go, why is my yield down? Why didn't I do what I thought I was going to do? I did everything right this year. Well, 2 years ago you made a mistake or you carved something out. You didn't do your math, or you didn't have the right conversation. And that happens to everyone. You know, I'm guilty of it for certain. But when you're looking at passes through the field, there's a lot of hidden costs. And so you go, okay, mummy sanitation, I need to get through there. And then, you know, Justin A comes out and says, hey, you're actually still pretty infested. Well, you've already mowed and shredded and you're done. But you're going to have 7% damage next year on your crop because you didn't get the mummies out. You didn't do a good job. So you go, okay, now I got to make another pass through the field. Well, you didn't save any money by being on time. And those are the conversations you got to have before you make those decision points. We've all learned the hard way, and I highly encourage you guys not to learn the hard way, because there are tons of resources out here at this event that you can talk to people that have made that mistake. And you go, you know, I'm gonna cut back on this year, and they go, yeah, you know, I don't think I'd do that. I did that a few years ago, and that really hurts later on, because in the now time, it feels like the right thing to do, because you're going to be on time and on budget. And that's something else to talk about. As farmers, I think collectively, we do what we need for the orchard. A lot of us don't even start with a budget, right? We know kind of what we're going to do. We kind of know the parameters of what our outlook looks like. A budget is a good tool to start somewhere. You know, there's standards out there for the industry. If you're projecting you're going to get this many pounds of crop, you know you need to put on this much NP and K, and then the micros and everything else. So you can start with a budget, and then in season you have touch points. You talk to your PCAs and they say, hey, you're going to have a problem. You know, so you start planning for that. And you look back at your notes, and you look back at what you did last year, and you go, why do I have this problem? Well, I didn't listen to Justin. I didn't listen to Pete, right? You know, I saved money last year, and that's why I'm compounding the problem. So there are touch points, and there are things that you can do. Maybe there's some things you're not doing well. Maybe it comes, you know, mummy sanitation, and you know your shaker driver left, and he went to work somewhere else. He's in another industry for the season, and you've got a temp guy, and they tear up your machine, and they cost you $20,000 in maintenance and repairs. Well, you're not saving any money. There's a lot of great custom guys out there. Maybe they are looking for work. Maybe that's something you're not doing well. You have to analyze it and look at it within your own business and go, you know, we're really not good at this. We're really not good at spray calibration, and we're actually always over 15%. You know, 15% in a year like this is massive. You know, if you had eliminated one spray completely, you were still at the same cost or higher than last year by 20%. So even if you're missing each spray by 10 or 15%, and you spray 3 or 4 times a year, you're 50% run over already. So there's some things that we have to look at and be a little bit humble about what you're doing and if you're doing it well or not, right? We all think we're the best at what we do. We're great. You know, I'm good at that. And then you go look at it, I'm not really good at that. You know, you look at someone else and they're doing a better job, and you think it costs you more money. But there's tons of hidden costs in every pass through the field and every function that we do. You know, there's maintenance. There's, you know, this year we saw supply chain issues with parts and things. You couldn't get parts. So if you broke down and you didn't have a backup plan, you were just stuck, right? And then we had early rains, and we had wet processing, and then your quality's terrible. And it all compounds on your crop. So it's all math. And the decisions we make now affect us long term. It's a 20, 25-year crop. You know, everybody's made mistakes, but there's too much knowledge in the industry to keep making those same mistakes. When you analyze your business, be cognizant of what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. It's okay to say, really, I'm not good at this. It's a little bit humbling, and sometimes it's humiliating when you make a big mistake, but it's okay because someone else in this room's already done it. I guarantee it. You know, there's you know, we stand on the shoulder of giants, and that's the industry for the last 30 years before us. We've grown and improved over time, and now it's easy. It's math problems. You go, should I buy this piece of equipment? It's a math problem. You know, if you're eliminating 1 or 2 passes and you're covering so many acres, you can say, well, I can pay for this piece of equipment in 3 years. That makes sense. You know, now equipment's expensive, but if you can pay for something in 3 years and you have a life of 10 years, and you got to talk to your accountants, and you got to talk to those kind of people that are smarter than me, but they'll tell you, you know, it's not, farmers are great about this, right? Every Christmas, I got to go buy a new tractor, right? Because my accountant said I need to spend some money. maybe it's not a tractor. Maybe it's a new irrigation pump or a fertigation pump or something along those lines. But tractors are shiny, and we like those things, and they're, they're fun. Now they got all kinds of buttons in them and things like that. But there's other things that you can do. You can buy an automated fertilizer injection system and be spot on with your fertilizer. And you can buy 2 or 3 of them for the price of a tractor probably. But it puts the nutrients at the tree where you want them. And then nutrients is a big thing we've all took our lumps on this year. You have to talk to your PCAs and your agronomists and your sales reps, because formulation is critical with your soil type and where you're at in your phenology stage of the trees. It's not just, do this NP and K. Your micronutrients package is critical for long-term viability of the orchard, but you have to understand your soils, and you don't have to be an expert. There's people that are experts, and that's what they're good at, and this industry has a lot of them. And so you visit with them and you use their knowledge, and you say, okay, I want to use this product because I think it's great. The salesman told me this is the best product in the market, and I want to use it. And if you have good people in the industry that's like, that is a good product, but it doesn't work for you because it's going to tie up in your soil. The availability of that's going to be less than this other product. It's going to be a little more, but you're actually going to get what you need out of this product. Or it's going to be a little less, and it's a better fit for your needs. So I really encourage you to utilize the resources in the industry, because they're there. This is a mature industry, and we have great people in this industry. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lucas. Next, we're going to move to Brittany Goodrich. She's going to talk about profitability.
Yeah, Lucas just set me up really well for this talk, so thanks for that, Lucas. But so we're going to talk about maximizing profitability today, and that's going to look different for everyone. It's going to depend on your soil type or your microclimate in your area. So I'm going to give you a few things to think about when you're making decisions. I'm not going to give you the answer. If I had it, I'd probably own my own island somewhere and not be here today. So I bring this up. So this is the math problem that Lucas was talking about. This is what economists think you all are doing when you're maximizing your profit. And I'm not, believe it or not, that equation came from an academic journal article that I wrote, and that is looking at the theory of maximizing profit in almond pollination. So that's what you all are doing out there every year. So that's kind of this is just a joke to put up there, but profit maximization in practice is even more complicated. So I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers, because I don't. So I wanted to talk about a couple of tools that are available. As Lucas was saying, there's lots of resources out there. So a couple of things that we can think about using when we're making these tough decisions. The first one is I'm currently running the UC Davis Cost and Return Studies program, where we develop enterprise budgets for all of the commodities in California. So there are enterprise budgets available, so you can get thinking about how to maximize your profits, and also just kind of going back over partial budget analysis and thinking about how we make these tough decisions about our inputs when input costs are really high. So here's, if you scan this with your phone, this will take you to the UC Davis Cost and Return Studies. We have a number of almond studies, though they're from 2019, so they're out of date. But thanks to funding from the Almond Board, we're going to be updating those in the next year or so, and they will be available in spreadsheet format this time instead of PDFs, so that way when nitrogen prices increase overnight, you can actually plug in those new nitrogen prices and get a better idea of what's going on. So this is kind of just a summary of what's been happening since 2019, since those studies came out. We all know that almond prices are down probably about 30% or more since 2019. And then as these guys have all spoken to, input prices are up in just about every category. And these are coming from mostly a walnut study that we're currently putting together, but they should be fairly comparable with almonds. But I mean, you have nitrogen prices have more than doubled, and some of the herbicides have also more than doubled. So Tighter margins really mean that we have to think critically about whether we should actually be maximizing yield. So we need to think about maximizing profit and what that additional input is going to actually get for us. So this is just to take you back to, Farm Management 101, thinking about partial budget analysis, where we think about if we're making a decision, we need to outline, kind of the bad stuff, I guess, is what I think about it on the left-hand side, or left-hand side for you guys, where we have the additional costs of that new practice and the reduced revenue, and then the good things are on the right-hand side. So I've kind of put a thought experiment up here. So maybe we were really optimistic about our yield before. So we're looking at 4,000 pounds per acre. But now maybe we're thinking with the way input prices are and the almond prices, maybe we shift that down to a target of 3,500 per acre. And then you have, the reduced yield, which we don't like. But you potentially have, reduced costs of fertilizer, irrigation, pollination, and you're spending less time harvesting. So you're going to have some reduced costs. So this is time to think critically about some of these things. My disclaimer on this, and I know this isn't simple because, what you do this year is going to impact what happens in 2 to 3 years. It's certainly not a simple math problem, but something else to think about in your not simple math problem is that if you have federal crop insurance, which, the majority of our almond acres are in California are insured with federal crop insurance, your crop insurance policies are going to be based on your previous year's production. So if you make changes to your target yield right now, you're going to not be able to ensure higher yields going forward. So it's something to keep in mind. And also, this is probably only going to happen if you do end up, like in the case of where we had this big frost this year, you have to make a crop insurance claim. The crop insurance, I don't even know what they're called, but somebody is going to come to you and look critically at all of your practices and say, well, did you put enough fertilizer on? Did you have adequate pollination? So you need to make sure that you're doing everything correctly, because somebody will come and check on that if you are going to make a claim. So optimizing fertilizer is something I've thought about a lot, just being from Iowa, because in Iowa it doesn't always make sense to maximize our corn yield because the price of nitrogen and the corn prices just don't pencil out. So here in almonds, we've been privileged to have, in previous years, we've had really high almond prices and fairly low nitrogen prices, so we've had, it makes sense to do a yield maximizing strategy. But when we see almond prices, decrease by 30% or so, and then our nitrogen prices more than double, it might not make sense to keep applying that same level of nitrogen or other nutrients, which I think these folks have talked about a little bit. So just think critically about what you're actually applying and whether that additional unit of fertilizer actually makes sense with the gain you're going to get in terms of almond yields. So something that I'm currently developing that I wanted you all to be aware of is basically a navel orangeworm IPM program comparison tool, and I'm realizing now that I need to put in like trapping costs in there, so that I'm learning all the time. So I'm just going to go over a quick example of something, a comparison that I've done with the current tool that I have that's still in development. These are all of the different costs that go into it. But basically what this is going to allow you to do is think about your navel orangeworm management program as a whole. So we're going to think about so you can basically compare two different programs where you have, here I have two programs where you have a winter sanitation, you have a spring pesticide application, and a whole split application. And then in the second program where we're thinking about adding mating disruption instead of that spring pesticide application. And so you can see here, this one, I assume that the percentage rejects from the handler stay the same at 2.1% each year. And in this case, you know, switching to that mating disruption doesn't necessarily make sense, but I also haven't included incentives, which I think are available now for growers. So, but basically you have your cost increase, you don't have any change in revenue from this, so it doesn't make sense to switch to this program. But then if we compare these same programs and decide that, okay, in the first IPM program, we're gonna have a 2.1% reject rate at the handler, and this actually decreases to 1.5%, then switching to this higher cost IPM program actually makes sense because your costs increase by $43 per acre, but you're getting an additional premium for having fewer rejects in your almond yield, and then you're having an increased yield as well. So then you actually gain $24 an acre by implementing this newer program. And so this is just something that's like I said, in the works. It's to get folks thinking about how we can, you know, switch up our IPM program, or maybe like we spend more time sanitizing and increase our labor costs, but that leads to lower damage rates, and it pencils out in the long run. Okay, so another thing to think about is maximizing profits in pollination, which I showed you that crazy math problem from earlier, but I wanted to highlight, because I know that a lot of you are probably thinking about cutting your pollination costs this year. So one thing that's important to pay attention to is your crop insurance policy again. So it's written in the loss and, I forget what it's called, Almond Loss Adjustment Standards Handbook, that producers must use a minimum of 2 6-frame colonies or its equivalent. So that could be 1 12-frame colony per acre, or 1.5 8-frame colonies per acre, whatever the equivalent is. And there is some rules for deviation that you can get around, but I won't go into that too much. Feel free to talk to me afterwards if you're interested. But so basically, I think we're all pretty used to this, you know, the 2 hives per acre at about an 8-frame colony strength requirement, which these are using numbers from a couple years ago, but I think it's probably still in line with today. So $200 per hive, and that's gonna be $400 an acre. Okay, so at that, you have 16 frames per acre, and remember the crop insurance requirement is actually 12 frames per acre. So all of these dollar signs show you lower cost options that meet that minimum of 12 frames per acre. So you could do at the top, we have 2 hives per acre at a 6-frame average is gonna save you money, or even, I think the lowest cost one is gonna be that 1.2 hives per acre at a 10-frame average, and that gets you your 12 frames, and it's at a much lower cost, over $100 less per acre. So you can think about substituting these two things, hive density, colony strength, and think about doing that. And I say these things, but you also have to consider whether this is going to affect your yield, of course. So just keep that all in mind. So again, just kind of wrapping up, coming in 2023, be on the lookout for some updated cost and return studies, this navel orangeworm IPM comparison tool, and then I'll also be putting together an almond pollination update that'll be running in the January issue of West Coast Nuts, so you can check that out. And there's the link to the cost studies program and my contact information too, if you need to get in touch.
Awesome, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody on my panel. We really appreciate it. I hope that everybody here had a chance to learn and hopefully hear something that you haven't heard before, and at minimum, at least have some questions to take back to your operation and ask your advisors, ask your PCA, your CCA, whoever you work with. Ask these questions that you heard here and say, hey, can I make a change in my fertilizer? Can I make a change in my monitoring or my bees? Whatever you guys heard here, we really hope that spurs a conversation with your trusted advisors, and hopefully you can find some strategies in your operations to navigate these tough times and these high input costs. Thank you so much for attending this session. Thank you for attending the Almond Conference. We really appreciate having you guys here, and we really hope that you take advantage of the rest of the day here. Sessions start at 9:05 this morning. In session room B2 down the hallway, we'll have Almond Stewardship 2.0. In B5, we will have rootstock selection to mitigate stress in the long run. That's going to be a DPR session as well for people who need credits. And then in B6, we'll have Almonds in Action, the Almond Alliance Advocacy Update, and 2023 Look Ahead. And at 11:30 in B5, we will have a pest management session. Once again, a reminder that the expo is open until noon today. The food truck village will be open from 10:30 to 1:30. And as you've likely heard, in an effort to continue and to refine and improve presentations, we're asking attendees of select sessions, including this one, to scan the QR code on the screen and answer 4 short questions about your experience in this session. We hope you've all had a great time, have a great last day, and we really hope that you've all taken a lot away from this conference. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel. If any of you have questions, the panelists will be around this area afterwards if you have some specific questions. Thank you very much.
I heard that you're no longer together. Forget her.